this whole thing with Charlie Kirk is absolutely crazy. The wild thing is that I've been seeing some people online saying, things like this. This is not surprising if you've been paying attention, which I understand the sentiment because, if you've been following things going on in America, like, I'm going to be honest, right? I am actually a somewhat long time political observer. Actually, probably been observing politics for way longer than I should have been. I spent like my childhood, evenings, afternoons, even mornings listening to talk radio. So I've been observing politics for the vast majority of my 25 year long life so far, and at least from what I could tell and what I can remember, the tenor, and I guess for lack of a better word, the vibe of the United States has never been this bad, right? I mean, if you take even before all the Charlie Kirk stuff and before everything that happened today, with the assassination of Donald Trump, stuff like that, you would have never expected to have seen that. I don't think, in 2012, you would have never expected to see the president of the United States get assassinated. We've had people attack members of the government at the state and local levels, all across the country, whether it be arson attacks, shootings, physical altercations that don't use any weapons. You could kind of, I off the top of my head, I'm thinking of 3 or 4 or 5 different instances of such acts of violence occurring. And one thing I like to do when I talk about these types of events is I like to be optimistic. I like to go on here and I like to say, violence is never the answer. Maybe parents will get their act together and parent these children better. Maybe things will sort of calm down a bit and we'll see less violence. But, it's kind of hard to be optimistic at this point, I will say, as far as the direction in which the country is going, because it doesn't really seem like anyone is particularly interested in calming anything down. Maybe that's a bit hyperbolic, but at least when you look at the people who are speaking out vocally online, it doesn't really seem like people are that interested in taming their rhetoric. For example, you watch cable news, a whole lot of people were spending a lot of time criticizing Charlie Kirk and condemning his views. I think that, if for a guy who just got assassinated with his wife and children allegedly there, I don't think that the first thing you should really be doing, or even the 6th or 7th thing that you should be doing, is spending time condemning his political views. I mean, I think what you should be doing is, if you're in the news, you cover the story, kind of talk about, what's the next steps, as far as finding the shooter or whatever. Maybe even talk about, what it might possibly be like to be a member of a family that's been affected by something like this before. Because, I mean, imagine being Charlie Kirk's wife or child at the moment, right? I'm not quite sure how you move forward or move past something like this, like something this visceral, especially in your face if they indeed were there. I mean, I think that rivals things that war veterans see, right? In experience, right? I mean, war veterans, they go, they make friends with the fellow soldiers. They see gnarly stuff. They lose members of their squads, whatever, as they engage in battle. I don't know if that's even the same as, you've married someone. It's a tighter bond, I would say, right? You have children with this person. It's just kind of crazy that this is happening. Now, I will say, right, taking pot shots at the president of the United States is worse than taking pot shots at Charlie Kirk. Right? I'm not condoning shooting Charlie Kirk at all, of course, but shooting the president of the United States is worse, right? But it's kind of crazy because, you know, there's the meme, right, that people are saying where it's like nothing ever happens or nothing ever changes, right? And then, you know, yesterday and today we're seeing some very shocked people on the internet saying, "You're telling me that something happened?" That's kind of the vibe. That's kind of the feeling that kind of comes with this as someone who is observing politics, because it's like, oh, you know, Donald Trump didn't die. Probably doesn't even have a scar in his ear anymore. But Charlie Kirk is a little bit more than that going on right now. This is just a terrible situation. And I wish that there was some sort of indication that just looking at the political landscape, looking at America as a whole, that things are going to get better anytime soon. But I'm just not seeing that, to be honest. We had the mainstream media going out there spending, you know, a quarter of the time covering the story, talking about how bad Charlie Kirk was. I will say that there was actually some surprisingly and refreshingly wholesome, coverage of Charlie Kirk. And I will say that they didn't really lead with the whole Charlie Kirk bad thing, but they did spend some time on that talking point. And so that was, I don't want to say disappointing, because my expectations and standards for the mainstream media are a little bit low at this point. But even on the right, we had some people, especially online, going out there saying, "You don't know what you've started. You're not ready for the backlash," etc., etc. For that too, it's like, well, what exactly are you calling for? What exactly are you saying is going to happen? To say you don't know what you've unleashed, I think is dangerous talk at this point in time. So the right, we shouldn't be saying anything like that at all. Now, one thing I do want to say, right, because I'm sure many of you who are watching this right now may be a little bit disheartened. I will say that it's not all bad. First of all, there are many, many, many normal people who are not on board with these acts of violence, right? So if you look online and you see a lot of people who are supporting this, endorsing this, celebrating, and even the people on the right say, you know what you've unleashed, etc., etc., just know that these people are the vast minority of folks, right? They're the vast minority of folks. I think the tricky thing is this question here, which I don't know the answer of, to be honest, is either can we or will we stop that segment of the population from actually being violent? I think a lot of tough conversations need to be had on both sides of the political aisle. I think especially on the left, because their violence has generally gone unchecked for what I've seen, but also on the right. There needs to be a reckoning on both sides where, we've got to get into a huddle and, make sure that we're on the same page about not being violent, not supporting violence, not supporting terrorism against civilians, especially civilians and American citizens. Absolutely unacceptable. Lots of people like to look at American politics with a binary, right? A lot of times you've seen me, on here talk about politics, and I sort of look at things through the binary of authoritarianism versus libertarianism, right? I want to seek to maximize libertarianism or freedom as much as possible without jeopardizing safety unreasonably, right? That's kind of where I lie on that binary. And so you can make up a binary, I don't know how to say it properly. I'm not really thinking too hard about it right now. You can make a binary about, where certain people lie, where the country stands. You're either on this side or that side. Many people do this with left and right, where essentially it's like, you're either with me or you're against me. If you want boys in the girls' bathrooms, you're over there. And if you don't, you're over there. And that's the end of the discussion, right? But I think that the worse things get in America, I feel like really there are only there's a different way that I think is probably best to think of the binary. Now, if there's ever a civil war, I think it will certainly be broken along these lines. Because if you look at the violent discourse online, the violent speech, that's being said by extreme people on the left, and it's being said by extreme people on the right. So there are going to be two sides if it ever comes to this. There is going to be a pro-violent side. There's going to be an anti-violent side. And the right and the left wingers are probably going to go together, even if they're the violent ones. And they're going to be like, hey, we want to tear the system down. Let's start blasting, right? And then they're going to be peaceful people who are just going to be like, I don't want this. But, I also can't stop it because I'm not violent or whatever. I think it's extremely important for you to, speak to people in your political tribe, for lack of a better word. It's not an echo chamber necessarily. I hope you guys are not in echo chambers. Speak to people in your political tribe and be like, hey, we're not going to support violence up in here. Right? We're not going to celebrate violence up in here or acts of terrorism or any of that type of nonsense. Right? This is extremely important. Galvanize the people around you and the people that you know online to be against violence. Because I think that that's the only way, without getting into the spiritual stuff, because of course, there are spiritual things happening in America as well. But, if we're going to take things from a secular perspective, or at least if I'm speaking to the general public here, that's the primary way that things are going to get better, right? Because it was really interesting. I was watching the Pat McAfee show, and he opened up his show with the word about Charlie Kirk, and he was kind of roundabout. I think he's not the most eloquent when it comes to speaking about politics. He doesn't like speaking about politics directly, for the most part. But the words he said, I most certainly appreciated. But one thing I thought was really interesting was when he was speaking, and this was terrible to watch, but when he was speaking, condemning the violence, and saying that he hopes the country can come together, he was speaking as if he didn't even think that the country was going to be able to get along. He was just like, maybe let's stop fighting. Which is kind of disheartening that we have people who are normal dudes, right? I would say that Pat McAfee is probably one of the best examples of a normal dude on both the content creation space and, the mass media space. He's a normal dude, right? Red-blooded American, slightly obese, who loves football, right? Drinks a bunch of beer. That's about as average as it gets when it comes to men of man in his demographics. But if he is coming on the air with the sentiment of basically, I don't know if you guys are even gonna get along. Maybe just stop shooting each other. I think that's a little bit concerning, and that doesn't even take into account the fact that we've seen a bunch of we've seen bomb threats, we've seen threats to various HBCUs. There was some sort of incident at a U.S. Naval Academy shipyard, I believe, somewhere in Maryland. A whole lot of things popping off. Certainly doesn't seem like things are going in the direction that we need them to go. But I think that there are a few things to keep in mind. I think the first thing, of course, I had already mentioned, was that the majority of people are not violent. They don't support the violence. The first thing. But I think the second thing is, I think that even in these scenarios, there are glimmers of hope. Charlie Kirk was a Christian. He was a believer. I don't know why I say was. He still is. Right? Right now, he is in heaven, probably having a better time up there than he ever did down here. And to be honest, if we look at the situation, to die ostensibly a painless death, I hear that, if you're shot in this way, you probably are not going to be feeling much pain. And if you are, you're probably not going to feel it for very long. But to die in this way, relatively painless, doing what you love, surrounded by people who hate you, but also some of your biggest fans, and also to be surrounded by your family that loves you. I'm sure maybe there are a few better ways to go out, but as far as ways to die, I mean, it's not that bad. I mean, for him, he was speaking to people, doing his best to change minds, which he loved to do, and then boom, just like that, he's in heaven. For him, I'm gonna be honest, that's not a sad thing for his experience. I'm sure that he's loving being in heaven right now, and I'm not at all happy that he died and got shot or any of that. I'm just kind of keeping it real, and also trying to be a little bit optimistic where I can. I mean, it's true. Of course, I'm biased. I'm a Christian, so of course I'm going to say something like this. But I mean, it's true. He's a believer, and he's now with the Lord. I think the part I think that's actually saddest about this is the family that he's left behind. Well, not left behind. I mean, he didn't leave. He was taken. But the family that is left here on this earth, I think, is the saddest part of the story. It's because Charlie Kirk is in heaven, right? That certainly helps with how bummed one can be about it. But his wife has to live with the pain of not being able to spend any more time with her beloved husband for the rest of her mortal life. The children as well, similarly, for their dad, they may not even understand entirely what happened. This may irrevocably change. I know, not may. It will irrevocably change his children and how they grow up and who they grow up to be. I especially hope that the children turn out all right, because situations like this, they can really screw you up as a kid, for sure. I think in light of everything that's been going on, there's no easy answers really for this whole situation. But I think sort of in honor of Charlie Kirk, what I would like to do is sort of end this segment by reacting to the last question that he took before he got shot and killed while he was there in Utah. This year we have from NTD News. It's called "The Last Question Charlie Kirk Took Before Being Shot Dead on Stage in Utah."
I'm going to give you some credit. Do you know how many mass shooters there have been in America over the last 10 years?
Counting or not counting gang violence?
Great.
This is the last question that he took. It was about gun violence. Debating whether or not it's, trans people who were most, I guess, at risk of causing these types of events to occur. Would have liked to see where he was going with that. I suppose now we'll never know. But yeah, from what I hear, the shooter is still on the loose. I hope they do end up getting the shooter. We're able to figure out why exactly this was done. We're all assuming that this was done for political reasons, but which political reason, which angle? Politics is a lot more complex than a lot of people like to admit, so we don't know the full story and the real reason why he got shot quite yet. There were some rumors floating around. I don't know how accurate those rumors are, so I'm not really going to waste time speaking about them, especially when I don't stream super often anymore. But yeah, certainly pray for Charlie Kirk's family, and pray for all of his friends. He had a lot of friends. It kind of happens when you're famous and you're not problematic. You get a lot of friends. So pray for his friends. He's got a lot of them out there. He's got a lot of content creator friends, a lot of politician friends, a And also pray for the nation that somehow we decide to heal instead of lash out as we've chosen so often to do. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all I can say for that.